Our next panel is going to be focused on how to create change in complex contexts. The first panel really teed up this panel perfectly, talking about how we all live in complex social structures, but to change them can be quite challenging. So I'll invite Jeronimo Mejia up to the stage, the Director of Regeneration at Colombia. And Jeronimo is going to lead us through this panel discussion. Thanks, Jeronimo.
Thank you so much. Firstly, I just want to say that I think it's really cool that we're mentioning ideas like degrowth and that we're talking about experiences out in the Amazon rainforest. That's amazing. I did not expect really to be hearing those type of concepts today. But I would like to introduce our panelists today. Today, we're going to further elaborate a little bit more about what we were just listening to and really expand upon what it means to be a systems changer. So if Tatiana and Valeria could please come up. Welcome that.
I'm good.
So yeah, we're going to elaborate a little bit more about what it means to be a systems changer. But before we do that, let's delve into kind of who we are. Just introduce ourselves slightly. So my name is Jeronimo. I recently graduated from a Canadian undergraduate business education. And while there, I was really inspired by my academic and cultural experiences to gain experiences in the more traditional fields of business. I worked in international wealth management, consulting, entrepreneurship. And as I was heading into my fourth year, I was kind of expecting to have a decent grip in what it meant to, what business was and the role of it in society. That year, I made a seemingly unimportant decision. I took an elective titled Business Strategy for Sustainability, and frankly, it just exposed me to this new worldview. And we were talking about some of the concepts that Andy Hoffman was discussing yesterday related to the planetary boundaries, and it quite really arose some tensions in me that were difficult to deal with. And that's when I found regeneration, because I longed for connection to kind of grapple with these tensions. And Regeneration's a nonprofit, it's a youth-led nonprofit. Maxime was here yesterday. He's a tall fellow, a little hard to miss. And what I've been doing over the last year is connecting these students who are grappling with these internal tensions and striving to create a community where we can discuss and share knowledge in relation to what it means to create change within our institutions. And I'm really excited to be here today to discuss systems change. So I would like to pass it off to Valeria. If you could tell us a little bit more about what it means to you, a little bit more about your story, and then also what inspired you to be a systems changer.
Thank you, Jeronimo. A pleasure to be here today. What my journey as a system changer started 20 years ago when I joined Ashoka, which is the largest community of system change entrepreneurs working in more than 80 countries around the world. And Ashoka basically has established who they are and what are their practices, what is their secret sauce, their know-how. And my role at Ashoka as a system changer was figure out how the system changers, who at that time were primarily working in the social sector, how could they build bridges with the corporate world and transform markets at a scale. We built more than 50 partnerships, and later I will speak more about it. But the bottom line is that I learned that it wasn't enough to think about hybrid business models, that we needed to dive deeper into what is system change entrepreneurship about, and how do they not just think, but how do they practice entrepreneurship in a profoundly different way. And I'm committed today to bring that conversation to business schools. I work at the Legatum Center at MIT Sloan, and I hope to be making a contribution in future years to build that connection between these two worlds that rarely speak to each other.
Thanks.
So my name is Tatiana Fraser, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. I come from Montreal, Canada. And my background, I started out as a social entrepreneur. I'm an Ashoka Fellow for about 12 years now. I co-founded an organization many, many years ago called Girls Action Foundation, which was addressing young women's leadership, empowerment, and social justice. And we started out as a grassroots organization, community-based, and had the call and lots of demand to scale that work. And I was very fortunate to study in a master's program, a Master's of Management program in Canada, a pioneering program with thought leaders, Frances Wesley and Brenda Zimmerman, who were advancing some social innovation and systems change in Canada. And that really informed how we scaled our work. And I loved it. When I was in that class and was introduced to complexity theory, my mind just was bursting with the alignment of the way that we were working and the ways in which we could think about scale and growth in a new way. So I stepped away from that work about a decade ago and was very, very preoccupied with systems change because I knew we were doing it, but I didn't have the way to articulate the impact, and I wanted to really understand how we were practicing. And I was very fortunate to be invited into a learning journey with senior leaders in Canada who were exploring the edges of systems change. And what I saw clearly was the need for opportunities for systems leaders to learn together, to exchange their practices and their struggles, to create opportunities for the emergence of a kind of collective intelligence that can help inform wisely how we move forward, because we don't have systems change figured out. We all know we're grappling with complex systems. And so with that posture, we started an organization called the Systems Sanctuary, where we teach systems change practice. And we use peer learning as a way to support ecosystems to collectively learn and strategize to shift systems. So that's what I do today. Thanks.
Thank you both so much. Really appreciate that. So as a young person that's striving to create systems change, I'm curious, Valeria, from your experience as a researcher and as a systems change leader, what are some of the qualities and mindsets that systems changers embody?
In order to answer that question, I will refer to a research that we did in the last 3 years, asking 125 system change entrepreneurs from all over the world, what is their worldview? What are their practices? What are their beliefs? And several of the speakers that have come before me have pointed to some of those beliefs and capabilities. And they have to, so I'm going to highlight the ones that are more, that haven't mentioned. And one that is a profound difference in the worldview or mindset of system change leaders is that they believe that, unlike advocates, they believe that everyone can be a contributor, that they start the conversation with everyone is well-intended. And then the question becomes, how can they engage them in the journey of change that everyone cares? So when you look at the practice of system changers, they are fundamentally enablers of change makers. And it's not just change makers within their teams, it's change makers in the ecosystem, change makers in the alliances they build. And central to all their work is, how do you help others to build a shared intent? And how do you build this team of teams kind of structure, recognizing that you may have a very clear shared intent and a destination point, but there are multiple pathways to get there. And that has as we will dive into later, it's also fundamentally system change entrepreneurship is about emergence, which it sounds profoundly different from the way we tend to teach entrepreneurship in a business context where the knowns are more than the unknowns, and system change is a space to be shaped together. So that is the worldview of system changers, and the question is what capabilities that point to, how do you teach them, how do you cultivate them, and how do we bring them to business schools in a way that is meaningful for both business and social entrepreneurs?
Tatiana, is there anything that you would add?
Sure. So I'm just thinking about the ways in which we train and support systems leaders with capacity building and practices. And one of the first things we touch on, and this was alluded to and spoken about in the previous panel, is establishing kind of the foundational theoretical understanding of complexity thinking. And when we do that, we understand and we point to that working with complexity and bringing that mindset is actually a shift away from kind of outdated ways of thinking and doing that come from Newtonian thinking, reductionist thinking, which are the foundations of the ways in which we kind of still operate. Like it is our operating system to still think in ways that compartmentalizes, that disconnects the mind from the body, that thinks in polarities, that thinks in linear ways. And this outdated way of thinking is kind of the operating system that sits underneath all of our systems that we're trying to shift. So when you're actually practicing systems change and you are bringing complexity, you're shifting away from that mechanical way of thinking towards a view of seeing the interconnectivity of everything. And that's quite a profound shift when we see how everything is connected, that we are connected, that everything is interdependent. And then that shift supports movement from hierarchical, dominant, kind of violent systems towards ways of being in relationship, in collaboration, and thinking about systems as health and balance. And so the mindset shift is actually embodied in the practice, that when we move into complexity and interconnectivity, we see the world differently, and therefore we come to the problems that we're trying to address differently. And the beauty of that is that we can bring then our whole selves, our humanity, connected more deeply in an embodied way in our own lives, in our classrooms, and in the work that we do. So that is kind of the underpinning mindset shift that I think can inform then the cultures that we're trying to create, that then move away from these cultures of hierarchy and dominance towards cultures of care, and ethics of care and ethics of love, which need to be fueling the work that we're all inspired to do. Yeah, thanks.
Oh, that is super beautiful. And I'm just trying to think about what are the different ways which we can instill that into ourselves. And I think we heard earlier some of the experiences that they're integrating into the classroom as it relates to going out into the Amazon rainforest and spending time in nature and spending time in community. I think that really kind of helps shape this perspective of interconnectivity that oftentimes can be difficult to obtain indoors. But I'm actually also curious about other strategies that you've learned through your work at the System Sanctuary, which help instill these inner kind of changes.
So we approach it, one thing that I heard yesterday that stuck for me and is really embedded in our approach is to think about this as a practice. Again, it's not something we have all figured out. It's an ongoing learning. And we need the kind of feedback loops and emergence to help inform how we move forward. So we teach capacities, and there are practices and capacities that are very specific. For example, creating the conditions to work across difference, or working at multiple level strategies, or understanding emergence. These capacities you can actually train, and there's lots of tools and amazing frameworks, we heard some of these earlier, that help to kind of build the leader, the systems leader, to be able to do their work more effectively. And often what we see is that people are already practicing some of these, but they don't call it systems change. So it actually validates the ways in which sometimes people may be intuitively working or wanting to be working, that empowers them. So there's building capacities and training, and then also moving into strategy that is much more collective, and that involves a process of collective sense making with multiple actors in the system to help understand, see, map out what are we doing, what could we be doing to help inform moving forward. So that's where we also support collaboratives and ecosystems, is in the sense making and the movement into strategy and concrete action for steps forward.
Thank you. As we kind of come to wrap up this session in around 5 minutes, I wanted to end with one key insight that you can share that you've learned from your work, which can help enable that change within business schools in particular. So Valeria, I wanted to ask you that question.
It's I would say that the time has come to, for many years, when I would interact with business schools, with management consulting firms, it was all about social entrepreneurs learning from business. And today, that the citizen sector has grown and exploded around the world, the time is for business schools to be humble and wonder and explore what can we learn from social innovators, from system change entrepreneurs that are advancing this change and have valuable experiences for the new generation of students. And how to do that in a way where it becomes very clear that many of the business ideas that are now becoming new concepts and are going mainstream, it originated as social innovations. If you look at green energy in Germany, it started in nonprofits. If you look at concepts like Airbnb, it started with a social organization. And even fintech can be traced back to the micro-lending and the challenging of the financial industry. So I'm only pointing sketches to what it should be central to the conversation of the future of business school.
Thank you so much. Tatiana, is there anything you would add?
I would say that it's really important to be connecting systems leaders like yourselves together in peer communities of practice, peer learning, so that you are sharing what's working across your contexts. And then you're also collectively understand the multiple ways you're intervening in the systems, so that we can see where you're influencing kind of at the landscape narrative level, and where you're influencing at the institutional level, and where you're innovating, and where you're kind of in the deep root systems working with the relational pieces, so that there is kind of a broader collective sense of what your opportunities are, and how you're intervening very strategically. And I would also not underestimate the importance of yourselves as individuals and how difficult it is to do this work. It's not easy when you're up against systems that are really strong and powerful, and the peer support in terms of not being alone, having people who understand where you're coming from, so that you are deeply fueled to keep doing that work, is important. And to not underestimate the idea that small is all, that when you're working deeply in your classrooms and creating cultures that are shifting the system to nurture students to become powerful leaders, that what we do on those levels, the patterns we're shifting in those levels, influence the higher nested levels at multiple levels moving up the system. So really to be committed to that level of depth and your own kind of spirit in that work.
Yeah, one of the things that Tatiana mentioned earlier was that oftentimes when you're doing systems change, it can happen that you don't realize that you're doing systems change. And I think that the students that I talk to who are passionate about sustainability and trying to integrate environmental and social concepts into their classrooms often they don't realize that they're systems changers. So I would recommend, if you're part of the faculty, to open up the doors to them and describe to them that they are indeed systems changers, and that there are power dynamics at play, and that business schools are complex systems, and kind of show them some frameworks that are related to developing these inner capacities that we've kind of been discussing today. And then if you're maybe part of the administration, connect these students who are striving to create change with the proper resources that they need to host their educational workshops and events on topics related to sustainability, their case competitions, so on and so forth. But thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to us today, and hope you all have a great rest of your day.